What if everything you've been told about silence is wrong? Think about it. From the moment we're born, we're taught that communication is king. Say what you mean. Speak your truth. If you're quiet, they say you're weak. If you're silent, they assume you're losing. But what if I told you that silence, when used with clarity and purpose, is one of the most powerful forces you can wield? What if choosing not to respond is the move that finally shifts the power in your favor? For anyone out there who's been pushed to the edge, misunderstood, underestimated, or emotionally drained, you're about to learn why your silence might be the loudest, most strategic message you've ever delivered. Here's the truth they don't tell you. The loudest voice in a relationship isn't always the one yelling. Sometimes it's the one that goes still. The one that decides, no more chasing, no more explaining, no more performing. That's silence. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you finally started caring about the right person, yourself, and the ripple effect it creates in those who once took you for granted. It's real, it's raw, and yes, it's destroying them from the inside out. Right now, someone out there is second-guessing everything they thought they knew about you. They didn't expect you to last this long in silence. They didn't think you had it in you, but you do. You've stopped giving them the emotional oxygen they once thrived on, and now they're suffocating in their own echoes. Why? Because your silence isn't just absence. It's a mirror, one they never wanted to look into, but now they have no choice. We're going to explore this in depth. You'll discover the unexpected power of silence, how it exposes manipulation, how it dismantles emotional dependency, and why your stillness isn't just strength. It's the foundation of Stoic relationships. And if you think this is just about making them feel guilty or regretful, think again. This isn't revenge. This is rebirth. This is what Stoicism looks like in action: strategic, clear, unwavering. Throughout this video, I'll walk you through how your silence has flipped the script, step by step. You'll see how it dismantles ego, magnifies truth, and restores your peace. And most importantly, you'll walk away knowing this: you are not weak for being silent. You are wise for stepping away. So if you've ever asked, do they even notice I'm gone, or is this silence doing anything? Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the more you'll realize your silence isn't just being heard, it's echoing through every regret they now carry. And trust me, by the end, you won't need to say a single word to feel validated. You'll understand why staying silent was the strongest response you could ever give. Ready? Let's get into it. 1. Emotional starvation. They were addicted to your reaction. They didn't realize it at first. When you stopped responding, when your texts stopped arriving, and your presence disappeared, they convinced themselves it meant nothing. Just a mood, a phase, a moment of silence before you came back, like you always did. But this time was different, wasn't it? You didn't say a word. You didn't leave a breadcrumb trail. You didn't even leave the door cracked. You just went still. And in that stillness, something remarkable began to unfold, not only within you, but within them. They started feeling the void, and that void wasn't empty. It was filled with echoes, with doubts, with unanswered questions that grew louder by the hour. You were the emotional anchor, the source of comfort, the mirror in which they saw a version of themselves they could tolerate. Every argument they started, you used to finish. Every cold shoulder they gave, you warmed. Every time they pushed you away, you came closer. Until one day you didn't. That day wasn't a declaration, it wasn't an explosion. It was a quiet withdrawal that felt to them like the air leaving the room. Now they're choking on that silence. They thought they could handle it. They thought your silence was just another tactic, a ploy for attention, a temporary retreat in the battlefield of egos. But now the days are stretching longer than they imagined possible. The noise of their own mind has replaced your voice, and that noise is anything but comforting. It's sharp, it's accusatory, it's relentless. And here's the truth they never dared to confront. They weren't in love with your peace. They were addicted to your emotional response. They didn't value you for who you were, but for what you gave, your attention, your availability, your energy. And when you stopped giving, when you cut the supply, the chaos within them began. It's easy to feel powerful when someone reacts to everything you do. It's easy to feel needed when someone always shows up, even after being hurt. But that was never balance. That was never love. That was dependency disguised as dominance. And when you took back your emotional investment, when you withdrew your reactions, you took away their oxygen. You see, Stoic relationships aren't built on emotional chaos. They're grounded in self-awareness, in clarity, in control. Your silence became a message, not a manipulation. It became a boundary drawn in calm. And for someone who was used to controlling the narrative through your reactions, that boundary is unbearable. Now they sit in a room filled with memories. Memories of how they used to provoke a response, how they used to get you to explain yourself, how they used to weaponize your vulnerability. But those weapons no longer work because the battlefield has been abandoned. You've walked off with your dignity intact, and that is what they can't handle. Not the silence itself, but what it represents. Strength, growth, detachment. The kind of detachment that only comes when you finally realize that reacting is not the same as resolving, and that presence does not mean peace. This is what Stoicism looks like in modern relationships. It's not apathy, it's mastery. Mastery over your emotions, over your patterns, over your own worth. They are now starving, not because you hurt them, but because you stopped feeding the illusion that they still mattered more than your peace. And they'll start testing the silence. You'll see it. A like on your social media post, a mutual friend mentioning your name, a vague, nostalgic message sent out like a baited hook. But don't be fooled. That's not growth, that's withdrawal. That's panic disguised as curiosity, because your absence created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, they're being forced to see themselves clearly, for the first time without your reassurance, without your forgiveness, without your emotional labor holding them up. And what they see isn't pretty. What they see is who they became when they thought you'd never leave, when they thought you'd always explain, always come back. But you didn't, because silence isn't passive. It's precise. It's not cruelty, it's clarity. And that clarity, that new posture of strength, is part of the Stoic relationships you've now committed to. Relationships that are mutual, balanced, and based on respect, not reaction. So now they're left with a haunting question. Why does this silence hurt more than any fight ever did? Why does your absence sting deeper than all your presence ever comforted? It's because the silence has stripped away the distractions, the drama, the deflections, and revealed the truth. They didn't value you. They consumed you. And now, starved of your light, they're left in their own shadow. But here's the beauty of it all. You don't need to say a word to make your point. You don't need to defend your decision, justify your withdrawal, or explain your silence. Because the silence itself has become the explanation. A living, breathing proof that your energy is no longer for sale, that your peace is no longer the cost of someone else's comfort. And while they try to find the old version of you in memories and miscalculations, you're already evolving, already stepping into a life that no longer requires you to bleed just to prove you're worthy. This is what Stoicism teaches us, not to be indifferent, but to be discerning, not to be silent for revenge, but for rebirth. Your silence isn't destroying them because it's cruel. It's destroying them because it's pure, because it's real, because for the first time they're not distracted by your defense, your explanations, your emotional labor. They're confronted by the stillness they created, and the power you reclaimed by not breaking it. That is what they never expected. That is what they're not prepared to handle. And that is the beginning of a new version of you. A version who no longer breaks just because someone else can't hold their own weight. Welcome to the strength of Stoic relationships. Welcome to the calm after the chaos. Welcome to the silence that speaks volumes. 2. The power shift, from controlled to controlling. They never imagined the silence would last this long. When you first stopped responding, they chuckled, told themselves you were being dramatic, that you'd cool off, collect yourself and come running back like before. Because that was the rhythm, wasn't it? They pushed, you pulled. They withdrew, you pursued. They stayed cold and you worked yourself to exhaustion just to thaw the space between you. That pattern made them feel powerful. It reassured them that no matter what line they crossed, your loyalty would cushion the fall. But now the script has changed, and it didn't change loudly. It shifted in the quiet, in the moments you decided not to send that message, not to clarify what they already knew, not to chase someone who was running in circles. That shift, it wasn't a scene, it was a stillness. But in that stillness, the power dynamic flipped completely. And the most poetic part, they didn't even see it happening, because when people are used to manipulating with noise, they don't notice when silence begins to win. You see, your silence became the catalyst for a new reality, one where you're no longer controlled by how they feel, or whether they approve, or what response you might get if you speak your truth. You stopped playing the part they wrote for you in a story that only served their ego. And in doing so, you stepped into authorship of your own life. That's the true nature of Stoic relationships, not being a pawn in emotional games, but being sovereign over your own peace. So now here they are, wrestling with a version of you they didn't know existed, one that isn't baited by passive-aggressive messages, one that doesn't respond to breadcrumbs, one that refuses to dance for attention, and it's terrifying them. Because the control they thought they had, it was never real. It was borrowed, conditional, and entirely dependent on your willingness to keep showing up. But the moment you withdrew that willingness, their illusion of power collapsed. Think about that. How many times did they feel superior simply because you needed closure, because you needed answers, because you needed them to care just enough to talk? And how many times did you silence your own instincts just to keep the peace that only you were trying to preserve? This is what makes your silence now so powerful. It's not an act of defiance. It's a declaration of growth. It says, I no longer negotiate with people who thrive on my pain. And the more grounded you are in that truth, the more shaken they become. Because people who rely on control can't function in freedom. They don't know how to connect without controlling. And you've stepped into a freedom that doesn't beg to be understood, that doesn't apologize for drawing the line, that doesn't sacrifice its sanity for someone else's validation. That shift is not just emotional, it's energetic. You can feel it in your chest, in your thoughts, in the way you sleep at night. Lighter, clearer, more whole. Because for the first time, your silence isn't about hoping they'll change. It's about knowing you don't have to wait for it. That's a hard truth for them to swallow. Because if you're really done, if you've really moved on, then they have to reckon with who they were when they thought you were always going to be there. And nothing is more threatening to the ego than having to sit in the aftermath of its own arrogance. That's where the unraveling begins. It starts with curiosity. Why haven't they reached out? Then it turns to discomfort. Why does this silence feel heavier than any argument we ever had? Then it becomes fear. What if I actually lost them? And by the time they realize the answer, it's too late, because you're no longer orbiting around their approval. You're grounded in your own. That's what Stoicism teaches, that the only true power is the one you hold within. That peace isn't a prize someone gives you for performing. It's a practice you protect. And right now, you're protecting it with every quiet day that passes, every notification you don't check, every urge you resist to break the silence, just to feel seen. That discipline, that's the new you, the powerful you, the version of you that no longer needs to prove your worth to people who never saw it. And while they may pretend not to notice, trust me, they feel it. They feel it every time they check their phone and find nothing, every time they scroll past your name and wonder why it hurts now in ways it never did before. Because the truth is they didn't lose you when you went silent. They lost you the moment they assumed you'd never leave, and that's what your silence is revealing. It's showing them how much space you held, how much peace you provided, how much effort you gave that they took for granted. And that revelation, it doesn't come with fireworks, it comes in the quiet. In the hours they used to spend arguing with you, now spent arguing with themselves. That's how the power shifts, not with rage, not with revenge, but with refusal. Refusal to entertain the chaos, refusal to play the game, refusal to shrink just to be tolerated. Now they're stuck in their own loop, wondering if the person they once dismissed has become the person they'll never get back. And you're not watching with bitterness. You're not waiting for an apology. You're walking forward, not because you're cold, but because you're clear about what you deserve, clear about what you won't accept again, clear about the fact that power isn't in being louder, it's in being unshakable. That's the beauty of this transformation. It doesn't need an announcement. It doesn't need a victory post. It lives in your new standard, your quiet confidence, your unwavering presence. The old version of you might have needed closure, might have needed to be understood, but not anymore, because silence is no longer a placeholder. It's a boundary. It's a statement. It's the sound of someone rising beyond the noise. And if this message is resonating with you right now, if you're nodding in recognition, if you feel the truth of what's happening in your own life, then you already know. The power has shifted. And it's not going back. You've stopped fighting for a place in someone's life and started building a life where peace isn't conditional. That's Stoic relationships in action. That's Stoicism lived, not just studied. And if you're still here, still watching, still feeling that quiet strength grow inside you, then take a moment right now. Like and comment #1 if this video is speaking to you. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. We're just getting started. 3. Absence over argument. You chose peace instead of war. You didn't storm out. You didn't scream. You didn't send one last paragraph meant to change their mind. No, you did something far more disruptive. You left quietly. You didn't leave to make them chase you or to provoke a reaction. You left because your soul had run out of explanations, because the silence within you had finally drowned out the noise of trying to be enough for someone who couldn't see your worth until you were gone. That kind of absence isn't a tactic, it's a transformation, one they never saw coming, one they still can't understand. Because people who thrive on control expect confrontation. They prepare for it. They script their defenses, rehearse their comebacks, and fuel themselves on the drama. But when you don't show up to the argument, when you choose peace over performance, it disarms them completely. They were ready to fight, but you weren't. Not because you gave up, but because you finally rose above it. That's when absence becomes a language more powerful than any word ever spoken. Because when someone is used to chaos, stillness is terrifying. Your presence used to give them an audience, a mirror, a cushion. Your voice used to soften the sharp edges of their insecurity. But now that you've withdrawn it, they're left alone with their own echoes. And those echoes are not kind. They are filled with reminders of every moment you showed up when they didn't. Every time you tried to build bridges while they burned them. Every sacrifice you made to hold something together that only you were repairing. That silence now surrounds them like a fog, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to escape from what they've avoided seeing for so long. You see, your absence isn't just physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's energetic. It's the closing of a door that used to stay open no matter how many times they walked away. And that's what they never anticipated, that one day the door wouldn't just close, it would disappear, not in bitterness, not in hatred, but in clarity. That clarity is what makes your absence hurt more than any argument, because when you argue, there's still a connection, still a chance to manipulate, to twist, to bait you back into their web. But when you're gone, when you're truly gone, all that's left is the weight of their own decisions. And that weight, it's heavier than any accusation. It carries with it every ignored message, every dismissed feeling, every moment of disrespect they thought you'd always forgive. And now they're sitting in that silence, trying to replay the story in their head, but this time without your narration. And what they're discovering is terrifying. Without your voice, their actions no longer sound justified. Without your presence, their behavior is no longer defensible. Your absence has turned into a mirror, and that mirror is revealing a version of themselves they never wanted to see. One that took for granted, one that played games, one that never realized the value of peace until it was gone. This is where the Stoic discipline comes into play. Because it takes more strength to walk away in peace than it does to stay and fight for scraps. It takes more courage to stay silent than to defend yourself against someone who's never really listened. And it takes a deep sense of self-respect to choose solitude over superficial connection. That's what they're feeling now, the gravity of your growth. And it's not just the silence that's unsettling them, it's the consistency of it, the way you've held it, the way you haven't broken it, the way you've honored yourself through it because they were waiting for you to cave, to call, to explain, to reach out and make things easier for them. But you didn't. You held the line. And in that holding, you've proven something they never expected. You're stronger than they thought, not in the way that breaks things, but in the way that no longer needs to fix what was never mutual. That kind of strength isn't loud, it doesn't need to be, because it speaks in your silence, in your absence, in the space you left behind that now screams louder than any confrontation ever could. They didn't lose you in an argument. They lost you in the quiet, in the moments they didn't appreciate your peace, in the times they mistook your patience for passivity. And now that you're gone, really gone, they're starting to understand the cost of that loss. They're starting to feel the discomfort of being alone in a story where they were once the center. But the story has changed. You've changed. You're not the same person who needed their validation to feel seen. You've evolved into someone who recognizes that true connection cannot be built on conflict. That respect is not earned through repeated apologies, but through consistent action. And they were never consistent, not in love, not in effort, not in truth. That's what your absence has highlighted. It's peeled back the mask. It's exposed the game. And now, without your voice to distract them, they're forced to sit with the reality of who they were when you were still around, and who you became when you finally left. That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to suppress our emotions, but to channel them with purpose. Not to lash out, but to let go. Not to seek revenge, but to seek alignment. And in choosing absence over argument, you've aligned yourself with peace. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. Because you finally realized that no amount of words can change someone who's committed to misunderstanding you. And no amount of effort can sustain a relationship built on imbalance. So you chose the only thing left to choose, yourself. And that choice, though silent, is roaring in their mind now. It's playing on repeat. It's becoming the background, music to every moment they once felt superior. Because now, those moments don't feel like victories. They feel like missed chances, like lost opportunities, like scenes in a movie that ended too soon. They're replaying every instance you stayed calm while they caused storms, every time you chose compassion over retaliation. And now that compassion is gone, and all that's left is the absence, that is what's destroying them. Not your silence alone, but what it reveals, the truth they refuse to face, the damage they refuse to acknowledge, the love they didn't know how to nurture. And as they sit in that silence, they're beginning to realize it's not just the loss of your voice they miss, it's the loss of who they were when they had access to your heart. That version of you doesn't live here anymore. And that's what your absence is showing them. With every passing day, with every unanswered message, with every quiet morning and silent night, you're not punishing them, you're protecting yourself, and in that protection, you're teaching them a lesson their ego couldn't. That you were never weak for staying, you were strong for enduring, and now you're even stronger for walking away. This is what it means to embody Stoicism. To hold your peace even when chaos tempts you to respond, to stand in your silence even when pride urges you to explain, and to walk forward, not to prove anything to anyone, but to preserve everything you've built within. That's the beauty of choosing absence over argument. You give yourself back to yourself, fully, authentically, powerfully, and while they struggle to understand it, while they pace in the silence, searching for the words you once gave freely, you're no longer tethered to that cycle. You're free. And freedom never begs to be understood. It simply is. 4. The mind turns on itself. Guilt echoes in silence. At first, they thought they were free. The moment your voice went quiet, they mistook it for victory. In their mind, silence meant they had the upper hand, that you were sulking, waiting, planning your return. They believed you were punishing them, trying to guilt them into reacting, and they welcomed the silence as a break, a breather from accountability. But what they didn't realize, and what they're only now beginning to comprehend, is that silence, true silence, is not a strategy for revenge. It is the soil where truth takes root. And in that soil, something far more terrifying than your reaction is growing, their own conscience. Because the mind, when no longer distracted by the noise of conflict or the comfort of your validation, begins to whisper, then it begins to shout. And those whispers are not gentle, they're not forgiving, they are ruthless, persistent, and exacting. They don't speak in your voice, they speak in theirs. And what they say is brutal. Did I go too far? Was I ever fair to them? Why didn't I listen when they were still trying? These are not questions you planted. These are questions that were waiting, dormant, beneath the surface of their pride. Questions that your presence once shielded them from. Because while you were there, they could deflect, they could argue, they could twist the narrative to avoid responsibility. But now, with your silence stretching like a mirror across their soul, they can't escape, they can't run. There's no one left to blame. And that's what silence does. It turns the mind inward. It strips away the distractions and leaves only the truth. This isn't a silence that demands anything. It doesn't scream for apologies. It doesn't beg for closure. It simply exists. And in its existence, it confronts. Every moment of that silence is a spotlight, not on what you said, but on what they didn't say. Not on what you did, but on what they failed to do. And now that the lights are on and the noise is gone, their mind has become the theater of their own downfall. Every memory becomes a scene. Every scene becomes a lesson. Every lesson becomes a regret. That is the echo of guilt. And guilt, when faced with no escape, becomes a storm. They replay the conversations where you tried to explain and they dismissed you. They recall the texts they ignored, the tears they mocked, the effort they minimized, and all of it, every single instance, they now see clearly. Not because you reminded them, but because you stopped. That's what they never expected, that your absence would become the very thing that makes them present to their own failings. And this isn't about winning. This isn't about making them hurt. It's about understanding that some people can only grow in your absence. Some truths are too loud to hear while you're still speaking, and your silence, it gave them no choice but to listen to themselves. That's when the mind turns. That's when the ego, stripped of its defense mechanisms, begins to unravel. They start to see how much power they thought they had and how little control they actually wielded. They believed they were the ones being chased, but now they see they were the ones being carried by your forgiveness, your understanding, your endless emotional labor, and with that gone, they're standing alone in a mess they made, without the one person who always showed up to clean it. That's when the mind becomes a prison, a place where every silence is a sentence, a place where the only escape is growth, and growth hurts. This is the beginning of transformation, not just for them, but for you, because you've stepped away not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. You've chosen not to be the mirror for their ego anymore. You've chosen to become the mirror for your own peace. That's what Stoic relationships demand. Not passive endurance, but powerful discernment. And as they sit in the weight of their own mind, you're finally free to breathe, to think, to rebuild. You're not punishing them, you're protecting yourself. And that's what they'll realize, slowly, painfully, and inevitably, that the silence they thought they could ignore has become the one truth they can't escape. So if you've been wondering if they're thinking about you, if they're feeling the effects of your silence, if your absence is doing anything, let me tell you clearly, it is. Their mind has turned on them. The guilt is real. The regret is growing, and the lesson is just beginning. If this message feels like your journey, if you're still walking in quiet strength, then don't let up. You are not alone. Like and comment #1 below if this part spoke to you. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another chapter in reclaiming your peace. Let's keep walking this stoic path together. 5 regret blossoms where respect died. Regret doesn't shout at first. It whispers, it creeps, it waits. And the moment the world goes quiet, it slips through the cracks of distraction and takes root in the mind. That's what they're feeling now. At first, they were certain your silence was weakness, a bluff you'd never sustain. They mistook your absence for sulking, not strength. They figured you'd break first, that your silence was just another one of those temporary moments where you pretended to be done, only to return again and again, arms open, heart full, ready to forgive what was never acknowledged. But this time, you didn't come back, and with every passing day, something colder than space began to settle inside them. Not because you hated them, but because you stopped performing for them. The cycle ended. The energy shift became undeniable. The silence wasn't passive anymore. It was protective, and that's when the whispers of regret began. You were always there, always explaining, always bridging the gaps they created, filling in the blanks they left. Every effort you gave, they dismissed as expected. Every gesture of love, they accepted as owed. Not once did they stop to ask how much it was costing you to carry it all. And now that you're gone, truly gone, not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, spiritually, their mind has no choice but to walk back through the ruins, to remember the details they once ignored, to rehear the words you once said, now echoing louder because nothing is interrupting them. Now they feel it, not just the absence of you, but the absence of who they were when they had you. Because here's the thing about people who take others for granted. They don't realize how rare loyalty is until they've drained it. They think presence is permanent, that availability means weakness, that silence means surrender. But now that your silence hasn't cracked, they're starting to understand what they threw away. They didn't just lose you, they lost the version of themselves that existed only in your light. They lost the forgiveness that met them in their worst moments. They lost the unconditional care that made excuses for their negligence. And now, in the absence of that light, they're sitting with the shadow. This is the part they didn't plan for. They thought regret would be manageable, that if they ever lost you, they'd simply move on, replace, distract. But regret isn't logical, it's emotional. And it doesn't wait for permission to show up. It arrives when you're brushing your teeth at midnight, when you're scrolling through a phone filled with messages from everyone but the one person who mattered. When you hear a song you used to love together, and suddenly it tastes like guilt. This regret, it's sharp, it's silent, it's slow burning. And worst of all, it's self-inflicted, because they know this wasn't some random fallout, this wasn't mutual, this wasn't a fading spark, this was the consequence of consistent disrespect, of playing emotional games, of testing the boundaries. One too many times, until there were no more left to cross. You didn't leave out of anger, you left out of exhaustion, and that's the difference. Because when someone leaves out of anger, there's still energy to chase them, still something to fight against. But when someone leaves with peace, with calm, with silence, that's when it hurts the most. Because it's final, it's real, it's beyond repair. That's what they're facing now. The echo of every time they chose pride over apology, every moment they dismissed your needs, every laugh they had at your expense. It all feels different now, not because the memories have changed, but because the person in those memories is no longer waiting for them to wake up. You woke up first, and you left, and now they're the ones stuck in the bed of broken expectations. That is what regret looks like when respect is gone. It turns once happy memories into painful contrasts. It rewrites the past with the clarity of hindsight. And in every rewritten scene, they're not the hero, they're the cause. That realization, it doesn't whisper anymore, it screams. And there's no one left to drown it out. This is where the stoicism within you becomes undeniable. You didn't chase closure, you didn't demand validation. You simply decided that your peace was no longer up for negotiation. You stopped explaining, you stopped performing. You stopped hoping they would grow into the person you saw potential in, and instead you chose to grow yourself. That is the turning point of true transformation, not the moment they realize what they lost, but the moment you realize you were never meant to be lost in the first place. You were meant to evolve, and now that you have, there is no going back. They can replay the past all they want. They can romanticize the version of you who stayed, who forgave, who tried. But that version no longer exists. They killed it slowly, with neglect, with mockery, with every moment they chose themselves without ever choosing you. And now they sit in the ruins, begging for a time machine that doesn't exist. Because that's the harsh truth about regret. It never comes early. It always arrives when the damage is done, when the silence is sealed, when the chance is gone. And for you, that silence is sacred now. It's the space where your dignity was reborn, where your self-respect was rediscovered, where the old patterns were burned down so something stronger could rise. That's what Stoic relationships require, not tolerance for abuse, but reverence for balance. Not silence to manipulate, but silence to heal. And your healing is loud now, not in words, but in energy, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you no longer explain your worth to those who never appreciated it, in the way you no longer wait for someone to see what you had to scream before. That silence is your sanctuary. It's your statement. It's the answer to every question they never had the courage to ask. And as they sit in that silence, consumed by the regret they once swore they'd never feel, you keep walking. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because your journey no longer includes the places where you had to fight to matter. That's what makes this all so powerful. You didn't win them back. You won yourself back. And in doing so, you've set a new standard, not just for them, but for anyone who comes after. Because now, you don't tolerate disrespect dressed as indifference. You don't excuse poor communication as someone just being busy. You don't stay where your presence feels optional. You've become the person you needed when you We're still trying, and that person doesn't lower their volume just to be understood by those who refuse to listen. That person speaks through action, through peace, through silence, and in that silence the message is clear: respect me or lose me. And they did. And now the regret they feel? It's theirs to hold, not yours to fix. That's the quiet justice of growth. It doesn't seek revenge. It lets time reveal what your words never could. That's the power of walking away with grace. That's the consequence of disrespecting someone who was once all in. That's Stoicism lived out in real time. And that's what they'll remember long after the silence has faded, how you chose yourself in the end and never looked back. 6. Silence as strength, when speaking would betray your growth. They expected you to explode, to beg, to break. That was always the pattern, wasn't it? They'd pull away, act cold, provoke you. And you, driven by a need for resolution, would reach back out. You'd send the long text, make the vulnerable call. You'd try to fix what they intentionally left broken. And in that fixing, they felt powerful. It fed them. It fed their ego, their sense of control. But this time, when the tension thickened and they made their move, you didn't respond. You didn't play the part. You didn't flinch. You chose silence, and that silence wasn't accidental. It wasn't born out of confusion. It was crafted with clarity, forged in fire, rooted in a decision to never again trade your peace for proximity. That choice, that stillness, it was the loudest thing you've ever done. Because real growth isn't proven in what you say. It's revealed in what you refuse to say, in what you walk away from without needing to announce your exit, in the boundaries you honor in silence. Your silence isn't a wall. It's a compass, a direction, a declaration that you are no longer available for emotional negotiations that rob you of your dignity, that you no longer need to be heard to feel seen. You've chosen peace over performance, clarity over chaos, evolution over explanation. And they don't know what to do with that. They don't know how to react to someone who no longer needs to defend themselves. They're used to conflict, to drama, to attention-seeking antics that prove they still matter. But you've stepped into stillness, into strength, into a version of yourself that no longer crumbles just because someone else doesn't see your value. That's terrifying to someone who thrived on your insecurity, who needed you to explain, to apologize, to fix things they broke. Your silence, your distance, it's a confrontation they can't escape because it forces them to face the truth. They were never in control. They were just reacting to the access you gave them, and now that access is revoked, not with anger, but with resolve. This is where Stoicism becomes real, not in theory, in practice, in the quiet decisions, in the moments you choose not to send the message, not to answer the bait, not to explain what they already know. Because silence backed by strength is a fortress. It doesn't block out love, it blocks out disrespect. And you, finally, are no longer open to disrespect just to feel connection. You've outgrown that need. You've outgrown proving your worth to someone who saw it and still decided to play with it. Now your silence speaks for you. It says, I don't explain myself to those who aren't listening. I don't chase what disrespects me. I don't shrink to fit into the spaces I've already outgrown. That silence, it's not an act. It's your new alignment. And while they're stuck replaying the last thing you said, waiting for the next thing you'll do, you've already moved beyond needing to respond at all, because growth is quiet, peace is quiet, power is quiet. And in that quiet, you've become unshakable. That's the thing about Stoic relationships. They're not about control or chaos. They're about clarity, and clarity doesn't argue. It doesn't beg. It simply is. It removes itself from what is misaligned. And now they're realizing that your silence wasn't an ending. It was a graduation. You didn't leave the conversation because you gave up. You left because continuing it would have meant betraying the person you're becoming. That version of you, this evolved one, the whole one, doesn't return to the places where your spirit had to fight just to breathe. and every second you stay silent, that version of you grows stronger. While they spiral, you stabilize. While they grasp for control, you ground yourself in presence. While they project, you protect. This isn't a game. This isn't revenge. This is healing. This is wisdom. This is what Stoicism looks like when it matures. You've learned that not every insult deserves a rebuttal. Not every attack requires a defense. And not every pain deserves to be nursed publicly. Some pains are processed privately, transformed silently, and then let go with grace. That's the beauty of your silence. It's not loud, but it's undeniable. It's not aggressive, but it's unignorable. And as it lingers, it reveals what they tried so hard to ignore. That you were the peace, that you were the balance, that your presence was the only thing holding together the parts of the connection they repeatedly neglected. And now that peace is gone, that presence is gone. Not as punishment, but as protection. You've chosen to protect your heart, your energy, your future. And that choice has created a silence so loud they can't pretend it's just a phase. It's a new standard, a new level. And that level doesn't include them because they didn't respect the old version of you. And the new version, they can't reach. You're no longer reachable through the old routes. They can't trigger you. They can't guilt you. They can't bait you into defending yourself. You're not available for those patterns anymore. You've walked away from the battlefield not because you lost, but because you no longer fight wars that only serve to wound you. That silence, that calm, it's earned. It's maintained, it's chosen, and it changes everything, especially for them, because now they're watching your evolution in real time. Not through what you post, but through what you no longer respond to. Not through what you say, but through what you choose to hold back. And that restraint, that discipline, it's destroying their illusion of control. It's dismantling the fantasy that you were always going to be there. And that dismantling, it's not your burden, it's their reckoning. Because you didn't stay silent to hurt them, you stayed silent to heal yourself. And healing is sacred. Healing doesn't make announcements, it doesn't invite validation. It simply happens. And while they try to figure out why their manipulations no longer work, you're too busy building. Building peace, building self-worth, building boundaries. Building the kind of life where your presence isn't given, it's earned. That's the power of your silence. It rewrites the rules, it ends the game, it resets the table. And in that reset, you reclaim the only power that ever truly mattered, the power over your own mind. As Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. You've realized it, you've stepped into it. And now, nothing they do can pull you back into a conversation that you've already risen above. This is what it means to be truly unbothered. Not indifferent, but self-aware. Not heartless, but heart-protective. And the longer you stay silent, the clearer that becomes. To them, to you, to everyone watching. And if this speaks to you, if you've made it this far, then take a moment now, like this video, comment number 1 below, and subscribe. So we can keep walking this stoic path together. Your silence isn't the end. It's the beginning of everything you were always meant to become. Silence. What once felt like absence is now understood as presence. Not a presence for them, but for you. The silence you chose wasn't an act of defiance. It wasn't a tactic to win a power struggle. It was a moment of stillness that stretched into strength. It was a doorway out of a cycle you'd outgrown. And now, in the echoes of everything left unsaid, lies your clearest truth. You were never the one who needed to speak louder. You were the one who needed to stop speaking altogether. In that pause, you found yourself. You remembered what peace felt like when it wasn't constantly sacrificed for understanding. You remembered what clarity looked like without manipulation clouding your vision. You remembered that you were whole before they questioned your worth, and you're even more whole now that you've chosen not to return to what fractured you. They didn't expect you to last this long in silence because they never realized the cost of your words. They thought your voice was free, but now they know it was a gift. And when they failed to value it, they lost it. This journey has not been about revenge. It's been about reclamation, not about punishing them, but about protecting you. And if they're hurting now, it's not your silence that destroyed them. It's the truth within that silence, the reflection, the regret, the reality of what they chose to ignore. And the beauty of your silence is this: it doesn't need to be understood, it just needs to be honored. Because in that quiet strength, you've built something they can no longer reach. A life, a peace, a dignity that stands unshaken, while the noise fades into the background. And from here on out, your silence will no longer be a question mark. It will be your period, your ending, and the beginning of a new chapter where your presence is not just powerful, it's protected. Stoicism taught you not to fight for what must be begged for, not to explain what should be respected, and not to stay where your spirit has to shrink. And now you live that lesson fully, calm, clear, untouchable. Let the silence speak, for it already has.